in Pasadena.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to the store before for events when a couple of my other books came out, but it's been a long time.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Max Young, and I'd like to thank you all on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore for joining our virtual event tonight. Tonight, we are lucky to have with us David Sheff, author of The Buddhist on Death Row. About halfway through tonight's discussion, Jarvis J. Masters, aka The Buddhist on Death Row, the subject of his book, will join us through audio, so we'll continue that discussion. Again, we're so grateful that you could join us tonight and continue to support us through this time. Tonight's event does include a Q&A section, so if you'd like to ask David or Jarvis questions, you can go ahead and click the Ask a Question button down there, and we'll go ahead and get to that about 40 minutes in. And lastly, if you're interested in supporting our bookstore, you can go ahead and buy David's books by clicking the green button below that says Buy David Sheff's Books. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest, David, for this evening. David Sheff is the author of Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction, Clean, Game Over, All We Are Saying, as well as many other books. David is on the advisory boards of the Jed and Clinton Health Matters campus program, designed to help college and universities promote emotional well-being and mental health programming, reduce substance abuse, and prevent suicide among their students. He recently launched the Beautiful Boy Fund, devoted to making quality, evidence-based treatment available to people who need it, and identifying and supporting research to further the field of addiction medicine. And with that all said, David, it's great to have you with us here this evening.
Oh, well, Max, it's great to be here. I love Romans. I've been to your store many times. I used to live in LA. Well, I'll start just by talking about Jarvis Masters, who, as you say, will be calling us from death row. And I should say in advance that because he's calling through the prison phone system, the quality, I mean, we'll be able to hear him, but it's sometimes not great. And there's background noise, as you can imagine. And then every 15 minutes, the prison phone system cuts him off. It'll give us a warning, and then he'll call back. Anyways, as background, Jarvis was born south of LA in Long Beach, and he grew up in Harbor City. And like too many of America's children, his childhood was characterized by poverty and violence. He entered the foster care system when he was 5, and soon after, the juvenile justice system, which Jarvis calls the youth on its way to prison system. After a crime spree, he was arrested and charged with a string of robberies. He was convicted and sent to San Quentin when he was only 19 years old. 5 years later, a correctional officer was murdered in the prison, and Jarvis was charged with conspiring to kill the guard and making the knife used in the murder. The killing of a police officer is a crime with what are deemed special circumstances which qualify for the death penalty. Jarvis was framed. He didn't take part in the conspiracy. He didn't know it was going to happen. He didn't make the knife, but he would have been killed if he told the truth. The trial in the Marin County courthouse was a travesty, and Jarvis was convicted and sentenced to death. He's been on death row for 30 years. He was in solitary confinement for 22 of those years. We are hoping, we meaning his friends, supporters, and I hope you'll join us, are working for his exoneration as his appeal goes to the federal court. Over the past 5 years and hundreds of visits with Jarvis, he and I became friends. He is now like a part of my family. Whereas many men sentenced to death become despondent, bitter, and depressed, and some literally lose their minds, there were frequent suicides, Jarvis went another way. He wrote books and articles about spiritualism and masculinity, and eventually converted to Buddhism. The Tibetan Lama who taught him proclaimed him a bodhisattva, one who works to end suffering in a place drowning in suffering. He developed a close friendship with the renowned Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron, who told me how much she admires Jarvis's ability to bear weight that could crush most people, and the joy he exudes in a joyous place. She said his interpretations of Buddhism and his insights help her achieve a deeper understanding of the religion. And as I said, Jarvis will join us, and it's sort of remarkable that he can, because remember, he's in death row on San Quentin, and the idea that his voice can reach out to all of us is sort of amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely remarkable. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and just start it off. I'll go ahead and ask you a few questions about Jarvis, the story that you tell. You can go ahead and answer them however you'd like.
Okay.
So First off, could you tell us a little bit about the writing process? As this is a book, how long did it take you to write? How did you end up constructing this into what it is?
Well, when I first met Jarvis and we talked about doing this book, I met with him about 5 years ago, and I told him, first of all, that if I was going to write about him, it was going to be the good and the bad. And Jarvis said, well, I can't be painted worse than I've been painted, which, as I say in the book, must be true for somebody who's been convicted of murder. But at that time, I thought it was going to take a year and a half, and I told Jarvis that, and he said, there's no way, and we made a bet. He won the bet because, indeed, it's been 5 years. And I've written other books, as you said, and they've been about business. They've been about, actually, I've written a memoir about, I've written a lot about addiction and mental health, but none of them have been like this. I would show up at the prison to meet with Jarvis and be turned away because there was a lockdown, because somebody had been stabbed. We were sitting in the cage, the visiting cage where we met, and there'd be an alarm, and the prisoners would all be yanked out of the cells and brought back to their, yanked out of the visiting room and brought back to their cells. Another thing that was a challenge for me was, because Jarvis has been in prison so long, and the story really is about how a person changes and how Jarvis changed over all that time. It was a struggle I had to figure out, and it took me a long time to figure out how that change occurs, because there aren't a lot of sets and settings all over the continent and the mountains and the rivers or whatever in Europe. It's all set, so much of it is set in a room, in a cell, in a cage. And so the story really is inside Jarvis's head. And it took a long time to figure out how to tell that. And he worked with me very, very closely, and he was very patient with me.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine writing from the point of view of someone else's head and not having close contact with them. It seems quite difficult, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about how you first came to meet Jarvis?
Yeah, we have a mutual friend. I had a friend who was talking about him for years, and she said she had this friend who was on death row. He was innocent. There was incontrovertible evidence that he's innocent, and he was framed, and the trial was, as I said before, a travesty. But she also described him as sort of this remarkably spiritual person who was devoted to doing everything he could to help people. And that meant people in the prison. And there were remarkable stories that she told me, and as well as people out of the prison. And the people out of the prison, it was through books he'd written. And there was a lot of reaction to the books, and a lot of schools adopted them. And there was a lot of talk about finding out who you are, and this idea of masculinity and what is a man, where does gang culture fit into that? Where does violence, where does your own family fit into that? So that was remarkable. And then inside the prison, that was sort of more remarkable, because we all have a sense of what it's like inside one of those places. And he intervened in, actions that people just don't do in prison. I mean, there was a lot of stories I tell in the book very, very quickly. One of them is that there was a young gay man, or really a boy, he was only, I think he was about 19, who was brought into death row, and he was on the yard, and he was going to be killed because he was gay. Jarvis saw that it was happening, and he realized he couldn't let it happen, but he could not have just gone up and blocked them and said, you are not going to kill this kid. He probably would have been killed himself. But what he did was he went up and he talked to the guys who were on the way over there, and he did something that I don't think he thought of it as a Buddhist act, but I think it was in a way. He went up and he talked to these guys about this kid over there, this new kid on the yard, who, because he was gay, had been through hell throughout his life. Just like we have, just like all of us have. He's suffered and suffered and suffered. And now he's in this place, and he's like a sheep, a lamb, and the wolves are going to get him. And our job is to protect the sheep. And suddenly it was a new purpose. It sort of, it became something very positive. It was empowering to them. Anyway, there was a lot of these stories. And so I went to visit him, and, I was skeptical at first. because I'm a cynical journalist, and
Yeah.
very, very quickly I learned that he really is the remarkable person that people talk about, and that telling his story was worthwhile, and it was really an honor to do that.
You were skeptical that he was as spiritual as you heard he was?
Well, I was skeptical. Every prisoner is innocent. I mean, that's what that's what you always hear. I mean, they'll say. So I was skeptical about his innocence. And then I also was skeptical about this other journey, because we do hear about people in prisons who, people have written books, people have converted to, to various religions and sort of born again, and people have written poetry, and there's a lot there. So I wanted to find out, first of all, if indeed he was innocent, and second of all, if he is indeed, if these people were exaggerating. And so that's what I had to be convinced of, and I was over time.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think most people would be skeptical of that, but if they saw the truth, they would understand. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move on. For many people, the idea that someone can be in prison on death row, sometimes in solitary confinement, like Jarvis, and yet choose to find the light regardless, is incredibly astounding. And I know that there's a passage in the book where you recount his experience of hearing the judge tell him he's received the death penalty, but then the next day he receives a gift in the mail that sets off an epiphany and leads him on a path to explore meditation and Buddhism. And I know there's a passage in your book about that. Would you mind reading that passage from your book?
No, I'll be happy to. And then I think Jarvis will be calling real soon.
Awesome.
Okay, the guards were quiet on the ride from the courthouse, but noise erupted when the van entered the prison. Jarvis heard car horns and guards cheering. Through the mess-covered windows, he saw COs giving one another the thumbs up. They were celebrating the death sentence. Jarvis was led from the van to the cell. Late that night, he heard footsteps and then pounding. He looked up into the blinding beams of flashlights held by guards, one of whom told him to step to the bars. Jarvis thought they were there to kill him. Mob justice, a lynching. Shielding his eyes with his hands trembling, he rose and stumbled forward. "We have to read this," the guard snapped. "You have to sign it." They weren't there to kill him after all, but to carry out the mandatory reading of the execution order. Jarvis signed the piece of paper that condemned him to die. The next morning, breakfast was delivered as usual, and the day progressed as if nothing had changed. Also as usual, the mail was delivered in the evening. Jarvis examined a large envelope from someone named Lisa Leghorn, who wrote in the note that she was the assistant and interpreter to a Buddhist Lama named Shagdud Tilku Rinpoche, who by coincidence Jarvis had read about months before and written a letter to. She wrote that the teacher was glad that Jarvis had reached out, and she referred to a small book in the package called Life in Relation to Death, which contained a transcript of a talk by the Lama. "Read it," she said. "See if it speaks to you." Jarvis picked up the book and was transfixed. On the first page, the Lama described death as a subject people often ignore or think about frivolously, as if it were no big deal. Then the author wrote, "This is a nice theory until one is dying. Then experience and theory differ. Then one is powerless and everything is lost. One is overwhelmed by great turbulence of fear, disorientation, and confusion." Jarvis read all night. He didn't believe in omens, but he needed in the morning, or by the sunrise, he was reeling at the thought that during his first day on death row, the mail had brought him a guide to dying. Jarvis wrote the Rinpoche back, and he thanked them for writing. He explained that he had, since he wrote to them, was sentenced, was given the death penalty, and he admitted that he was afraid. Prison mail is slow, and it took a month for him to hear back from the Lama, who said he understood Jarvis's confusion and fear. "You can use your circumstances for your betterment and to benefit others," he said. The thought appalled Jarvis. Being on death row was no gift. The Lama wrote that all people have been sentenced to death. In that way, Jarvis wasn't unique. That idea angered Jarvis too. Yes, he thought, everyone is going to die, but not everyone is living 100 yards from the site of their execution. "We all live in prison, and we all hold the key," Shagdud Tulku Rinpoche wrote. More patronizing bullshit, Jarvis thought. "You do not live in prison. I live in prison. You may have a key, but the keys to my cell are hanging off my jailer's belts." Jarvis's anger diminished when the Lama offered concrete instructions. Stick with meditation because it allows us to gain insight into our own mind and its projections. Fear is in your mind, regret is in your mind. The key, the teacher said, was practice. Jarvis should meditate at least twice a day, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. He should allow himself to feel doubt, confusion, anger, and fear. Jarvis tried, but his despair only worsened. He also tried to reread Life in Relation to Death, but he couldn't bear it. He wrote back and admitted he was falling into the darkest place, and he didn't know if he'd ever be able to pull him out. Lisa Leghorn responded again and suggested that she talk to him in person, and she went to visit him in San Quentin after her application was approved. Jarvis had expected a Tibetan like the Lama in the photograph, but Lisa looked like a flower child or a gypsy. She wasn't a cold and detached Buddhist scholar. She was open and kind and funny. After some small talk, Lisa said that she and Rinpoche understood his despair and his difficulty meditating. Yes, it's hard, but it can save you. Jarvis broached something that had been gnawing at him. In these books, I see pictures of Buddhists sitting in robes on mountain peaks, chanting in these gardens with white flowers and blue sky. Maybe that works there, but how am I in the world going to sit in this hellhole praying for some stone fat man? I live with rapists and killers. Everyone talks about enlightenment, living in the light, but I live in hell. She responded with a parable about a woman named Kisa Gotami who had lived at the time of the Buddha. Her son died, and she was overcome with grief. Carrying his lifeless body, she set off in search of the Buddha. After many days, she found him and pled with him to bring her child back to life. The Buddha said he'd make a medicine that would revive him, but it required a special ingredients, mustard seeds that came from a home that hadn't been touched by suffering. He sent Kisa Gotami to find some. She went from village to village and house to house, knocking on door after door. People pitied her and were happy to help. But the seeds they offered were useless because every person she met had suffered. She was desperate when she reached the 1,000th door. She knocked and a woman answered. Once again, she begged for mustard seeds. The woman had some, but then Kisa Gotami asked if she'd experienced suffering in her life. Of course, the woman looked up and said her life had been filled with suffering. Kisa Gotami wept. She wasn't crying herself, but for everyone she'd met. She understood at last what the Buddha had wanted her to see, that no one escapes suffering and no one escapes death. She had experienced what she needed in order to get past her grief. She felt her compassion for others. The instant she felt that, she grasped the universality of suffering and the impermanence of life. She became awakened as a person who grasped the true nature of existence. That night, Jarvis lay in his cot listening to the prison's unceasing noise, sobs like crying wind, coughing, hacking, the footsteps of guards. After having been unable to meditate for months, he moved to the floor, crossed his legs, and sat erect. He inhaled as deeply as he'd ever had. In a dreamlike state, he saw a man sitting in meditation, his body engulfed in flames. He focused on the meditator and recognized him. The man was himself. As if he were watching through a telephoto lens, he panned back from inside his cell to the tier. Somehow he saw inside the other cells, each containing a man who was also on fire. He zoomed out more and saw San Quentin from the sky. From that vantage, he saw several thousand burning bodies. Still higher from the clouds, still higher from above California, also engulfed in flames. Then the continent, then the Western Hemisphere. Next, he was watching from space. From that height, he saw the whole planet floating in blackness. The water was blue, the land masses were brown and green. On those expanses, wherever there were humans, fires burned. Jarvis returned to the prison, to the thousands of men in cages unfit for animals. He thought of Kisa Gotami and realized that suffering was all around him, everywhere humans were. When he opened his eyes, he was shaking, and tears were streaming down his cheeks.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very powerful section. It's Buddhism, quite obviously. And my next question is if you've tried to learn some of the teachings of Buddhism, if you've meditated before, and if you have, are there any lessons that you found to be incredibly important that you think other people could benefit from?
Yeah, I was ignorant of Buddhism, uninterested in Buddhism. I did meditate some, and I found it useful, but I never really understood it. It was too easy for me to skip when I wasn't in the mood, or when it felt, hard, or when I was tired, or any excuse not to do it. But over time, I realized that meditation really did save Jarvis's life. When he learned to meditate, he was so bleak that he described to the person who helped him, who was one of his criminal investigators, described that he was feeling suicidal, that he was so depressed sometimes he couldn't get out of bed. and it broke her heart, and she wanted to help him, and that was all she knew to be able to offer. And at first he resisted it. She told him to sit, to close his eyes, breathe, and he was angered by that. He said, "You do not sit in prison. You do not close your eyes. You're always vulnerable to attack. You want to have your eyes open." But eventually his suffering was so great that he did it and found some moments of relief from the fear, the monotony, the noise, the smell, everything he describes. He said that I guess it did two things for him. The first one is it provided a moment of peace, because when you're meditating and when you get into a meditative state, there really is no future and there really is no past. You are in the present moment. And in the present moment, he was fine. It was the fears of the future and it was the trauma of the past that where he suffered from. But the other thing was that all the meditation was not about bliss and joy. It also forced him sometimes to go back into his life and to confront the suffering, to confront some of the worst memories that he had about his childhood. And he said it was painful and it was hell, as his teacher described it, burning in the fire. But he said it changed him. I experienced some of that, inspired by Jarvis, realizing when I didn't want to do it was exactly when I should do it. I still didn't become a Buddhist, but I also recognized the power of the religion to help, I think, anybody. It's not about religion, or it doesn't have to be about religion. It can be about a way of life. It can be a way of getting through life, and the way of looking at other people with that compassion in that story. And with that compassion comes what Jarvis has found out, which is that there is an obligation that comes with that, which actually is freeing, which is doing what you can to help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems Jarvis will join us in just a few minutes. So I'll go ahead and pose one last question for you. What are your hopes for this book? When writing it, what did you want to come out of it?
Well, I guess there are, a few things. One of them, of course, is to tell people about Jarvis, to alert people to his case, to understand that he's innocent and shouldn't be there, to talk about death row and the death penalty. I don't know if most people, even in California, realize that in the California death row, which is in San Quentin, there are about 700 men, and in another institution, there are about 10 women. So we have about 710 people in California who are on death row. Jarvis was in solitary confinement for 22 years, and it has taken this whole time he recently completed his appeals in the state of California, and it's now going to federal level. And our hope is that he'll get out of there. He'll be exonerated.
Yeah. And
we're going to leave some information at the end, I hope, about his website and some other information about how anybody who's interested in helping can help. The other thing, I'm sorry?
I'll go ahead and drop those links in the chat as Jarvis is talking, so people can go ahead and research that and put their own work in.
Perfect. And the other thing I was going to say is that my other hope is I'm sorry, I'm setting up the phone to make sure he can call in.
No worries.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
This is what it's like trying to communicate with somebody in prison. I guess the other hope is that just as I was impacted by Jarvis's story, one thing that he talks about is that because he has been able to find freedom, as that's the name of one of his books, Finding Freedom, in the bleakest place on earth. Sometimes he hears from people write him letters and they're suffering so badly. And they aren't in prison, but they are in a prison in some ways of their minds, and they're suffering and they're depressed and they're overwhelmed and they're scared and they're just suffering. And right now, COVID, injustice. I mean, there's so much going on in our world, and I think a lot of people are stressed and are suffering. And in Jarvis's struggle, in his journey, I think really is a path that can help any of us find our own kinds of freedom. And so I'm hoping that will be part of the impact as well.
Yeah. Well, if Jarvis isn't ready yet, I can go ahead and pose you another question if you'd like.
I'm sure. And I would think he'll call any minute. Sometimes they have to. The way it works is that the inmates have to request the phone. The guard has to bring the phone on a cart to their cell. They put the phone into the slot. There's a slot on the door where they give them food, and that phone goes in there. And then there's a whole rigmarole about how he has to go through the prison concession, the phone system. It's this company called GTL. And anyway, so hopefully he'll be able to get through.
That's incredibly painstaking. Oof. So I feel like this is a pretty quick question. How does writing this book compare to your previous books? What was different?
Well, it was it was really different. Every book is hard. I think before this one, the hardest one was Beautiful Boy, because it was, about the hardest time in my life and my family, about my son's, addiction and almost dying of addiction. And so that was a memoir, and written at some of my worst in the middle of the night, in tears when I didn't know where my son was. And it was useful. It helped. It was cathartic sometimes. And sometimes the writing, I didn't even imagine that it would be in a book. It was just about getting through the night sort of stream of consciousness writing. So that was hard in that way. A book about what is addiction, what is the science of addiction, that was challenging, but it wasn't personal. I was able to rely on a lot of experts. I've written a couple business books, but this was different because I've never done anything that was like, I've never written about anyone else in this way that was so deep. And so it involved so much trust on Jarvis' part. And of course, that happened over time. He was rightfully cynical after a lifetime of being abused and betrayed by lawyers, by teachers, by foster parents. I mean, his stories are horrific. A foster parent who was threatening him because if she told anybody about the maltreatment that was he and other foster kids were experiencing, she put Jarvis's hand in a garbage disposal and turned it on and didn't quite put his fingers in there, but said the next time that would happen. Or he was in a place where there was a juvenile justice system, juvenile hall, and a guard made Jarvis and some of the other kids burn themselves with cigarettes. The first one to stop was beaten. I mean, just one thing after the other. So the idea of opening up in these sort of painful, stories, of course, was just beyond. It was hard. It was like another form. It was kind of like a kind of psychotherapy / the same kind of meditation I was describing, sitting in the fire. And but over time, I talked about myself as well, and as I said, I really feel like we got to be friends. And I went to visit him with one of my children. My son Jasper went with me one time to visit Jarvis, and they've stayed in touch some. And my wife came with me, and everyone has sort of fallen in love with him, as people do. When I leave the prison, I feel it's just heartbreaking every single time you can imagine leaving.
Yeah.
We are in a visiting room, and that's bleak enough. But I walk out of San Quentin, which is on the San Francisco Bay, and it's this sort of glorious view of the bay and the Golden Gate, and actually from there the Richmond Bridge, and this fresh air. And he, in the meantime, is led by guards off into the cell blocks, back into his cell, which, of course, you can all imagine is how, it's just bleak. I once said to his teacher, Pema Chodron, because she is a Buddhist nun and she's this very sensitive, loving person, and I asked her about her experience when she leaves Jarvis at San Quentin, and sort of imagining it was similar to mine, and said, how do you do it? Doesn't it just break your heart? And she looked at me with almost like surprise, and she said, no, it doesn't break my heart, because we have so much fun. And that, I thought, was a very Buddhist way of seeing that experience.
Yeah.
What it's like.
Yeah. So it's known that Jarvis, while in prison, contracted COVID, and he's doing better, thankfully. But if you know any knowledge, could you explain a little bit how the outbreak happened in the first place? And if there's anything being done to control it and protect the prisoners?
Absolutely. I'm looking again at the phone again. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay. there are buttons I have to push when he calls, but he hasn't called yet, and I'm hoping it's not a problem with getting the phone, or sometimes the phone system is down. The other day, because of COVID, I'll answer your question in a sec, but because of COVID, there have been protests at San Quentin because of the impact on inmates. San Quentin has about 3,000 people in it now, a little bit more than that, and 2,000 people, 2/3 of the people, have been positive for COVID. And the only reason that happened, there were 0 cases, but in its infinite wisdom, the prison system decided to transfer over 100 prisoners from another institution where there was a COVID outbreak to San Quentin. So San Quentin went from 0 to, as I said, 2,000 cases. And Jarvis got very, very, very sick. He was one of the first people in the prison to catch the disease, and he suffered through it for about 2 weeks. He was okay, but Jarvis knows. Hello?
This is Global Kelly.
Jarvis
you have a prepaid call from Jarvis.
Here he is.
An inmate at the California
The
State
reason
Prison,
he
San
couldn't get the phone
Quentin,
one time
San
is because so
Quentin,
many guards were
California.
outside dealing
This
with
call and your
protesters
telephone
about
number
the
will be
COVID
monitored
situation,
and
that all the
recorded.
there were
To
not
accept
guards
this
to
call,
bring
say or
the inmates
dial
the phone.
5 now.
Man.
Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Can you hear?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
Jarvis.
Hey, how are you guys?
Hey, Jarvis. Thanks
Good.
for calling. I'm talking to Max, who's in Los Angeles at Vroman's Bookstore, and there are a bunch of people who are fans of the bookstore and also fans of yours and supporters who have joined us and are so happy that you're here with us. I've talked a little bit about your case. I've talked a little bit about our experience working together. And Max has some questions for you. And then at some point, people who are tuned in have been submitting questions as well.
Okay. Hey, I'm just glad to be able to answer the questions and just participate and talk about your book and my life and relationship to it, being that's the book. But yes, I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, my name's Max. It's nice to meet you over the phone, Jarvis. So I'll go ahead and just pose a few questions for you. You can go ahead and answer them however you'd like. To start off, since you're calling through the phone, we obviously can't see the room that you're in. So
Sometimes they.
Say again, please.
Okay.
Awesome. Would you be able to describe the room that you're sitting in, since we're not able to actually see you right now?
Oh, okay. I am, on the east wing of San Quentin, and it's a cell block called East Block, and there's 5 tiers, and each tier has about 54 cells, and it goes all the way up to the 5th tier. We stay in our cells, most of the day. We get so many hours of outside activity, and because of the COVID-19, we haven't been getting that. Of course, our cells are small. We're allowed to have a TV, a radio, a lot of writing materials. It's real noisy. It's real noisy compared to I think any of your viewers or the people there has ever heard before. I write, I meditate, and I try to wait patiently, in my practice for my case to be heard in the federal courts.
Yeah, and I can't wait for that to go through and for them to finally see the truth. So could you tell us a little bit about how you came to trust David with telling your story? I mean, it's no small issue for you. So how were you able to put that much trust into David?
Well, a lot of the people there just can feel David's spirit. I mean, I'm sure everyone can, and his energy and what he brings to his books and his work, and how he cares about me. So, I had the opportunity to look at that and just spend some time with him before, I said, yeah, David, let's do it. Um, but I also thought, that my own books were out there, so I thought it would be a very, very different kind of book. Um, and the worst parts of my life, I guess, was already out there, So trusting David was not that hard to do because I just felt his spirit and he gave me an opportunity to trust him. And I was hoping that I gave him an opportunity for him to hear the truth about my life. And when I read the book, and I read it several times, he did that.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
He gave his heart and his skills to really try to understand me, and reading his book really, really, it brought tears to my eyes. It made me laugh. I felt embarrassed at times because he actually wrote that, because I thought, that was not an interesting story to tell, but I ended up telling it. He made good judgments in that. I just love the guy, and he's been a very, very dear friend to me from the beginning.
Yeah, and
I talked Jarvis a lot about the way that, of course, I feel about you, my dear friend and a member of our family. I mentioned that my son Jasper and my wife Karen have visited, and as soon as COVID's over, we'll be back.
Oh,
so
that's what. No, you said that. Yeah, I really hope that the whole family can come back and visit me, or I can visit you guys next time.
That's what we're really waiting for.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be that will be incredible. Yeah.
It really would, because I get a chance to see how he lives.
Yeah. So Jarvis, what do you hope to come out of this book? Do you just want more people to know your story? Just talk a little bit about what you want people to get from this book.
A few things. One is I want, of course, I wanted to advance my case into the public. I really hope that it would do that. I thought it would also be someone's telling my story from a different point of view, but finding out what's important for society to know about me. I thought what David was going to speak about, and he sure did, was good for a lot of high school kids to pick up his book and read it. I thought professionals involved in the juvenile system and, the correctional system would get a chance to read this book, and something about that would make them understand what prisoners go through in their life stories. And I also thought that it would be beneficial to the Buddhist community. I just thought that, it was letting the Buddhist community know that there's a practitioner, and he is not like you guys, He's in prison, he's on death row, and he's working to the benefit of the people in my life and the people on death row and all around me. So I just thought that was a greater challenge. I still do sometimes, that there's so much violence, and there's so much hatred, and there's so much pain and suffering, and for me to walk out on the exercise yard and realize and see all that, it just makes me fill that up. I like to just figure out how I can bring that, that idea of what Buddhism is to a lot of people here. And I think I've done that, but I think I need to do a lot more of that. And I think David's book is going to help me do that.
Yeah. Do the prisoners who are with you, do they listen to you, and do they respect what you try to tell them and teach them? I would hope that you definitely deserve respect, but I'm wondering if you actually receive it.
I do, I do, and I don't. And
Yeah.
and that's just the way it is, right? I mean, not everyone's gonna want to listen to you, even if you're right. They're not gonna say you're right. They're gonna, insist on doing something that's not gonna help them. But there are people who do listen to me, and um, there was one story that I'm just thinking about now about this guy. He's older than me. He wanted to, he just came to me and said, man, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. I said, what do you mean you're done with it? He said, there's no doubt that I'm guilty of this, and I have a daughter who's been with me for 40 years of her life, and she doesn't want to leave me. She lives right here in the neighborhood, and I'm just dragging everybody down. I want to get this stuff over with. And he answered. Usually I would have an answer to a lot of questions like that, but he hit on all points.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I couldn't say anything to him that he had not already contemplated. And I guess he was using me just to check those boxes, and I got so pissed off at him that I just said, man, let's just wait a minute. Just wait. Let's wait a day. Let's wait 2 days. Let's wait 3 days. This don't have to happen today, And lo and behold, in those days that came by, he totally reversed his idea about that. And he did it because he had a letter from someone, a pen pal, who wanted to know more about him and his life story. And it was not like I did that on purpose. I didn't have the answer. And when I said wait, that was the best answer that I was able to give to him. And it's stories like that, and it's things like that that just somehow your Buddhist practice checks in, and it does this, and it says the things that need to be said. And those are the people who listen to me the most.
There was a guy named Freddie who was a friend of Jarvis had been there, similar background, had been in San Quentin. I think it was 35 to 40 years on death row. And I talked to him, and he had one story after another after the other, but he was addicted, and he'd overdosed, and he had a hellish life. And Jarvis, is the one who really got him through. He was suicidal, and Jarvis got him through and spent time with him. And then he said one day, Jarvis gave him a book to read, and it was the Buddhist 12 Steps. And Jarvis said, we're going to get through this. And the guy told me that because Jarvis used the word we, everything, it was the beginning. And it wasn't like, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to help you. It's like, we're going to do this together. And they went through these 12 steps together. And he really credits Jarvis with the fact that he survived.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move.
Just to touch on that just one bit, he was found completely innocent, and now he lives home. He's in Oklahoma living with his family. He was one of the few people that was, that has their whole case has been reversed. And the guy don't even write me, but I know he's doing well, and I'm so happy that I helped him get out of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's incredible. So we do have some questions from the audience. I'll go ahead and read those out for both of you. The first one is directed towards David. In listening to you reflect on the power of meditation as it relates to being in the present and processing trauma, and also taking into account your expertise in substance abuse and treatment, how do you feel this applies to EMDR?
Without going into a big explanation of EMDR, I mean, it really is a powerful tool, and it is related to meditation. It is, it's about experiencing. And one of the things I think Jarvis has talked to me a lot about was the times that he was meditating in the beginning, where it not only in your mind it feels like you're burning in fire, but in your body too. And I think, because we hold trauma in our bodies, and I think that that's one of the things that EMDR is all about.
Yeah, awesome. The next question is for you, Jarvis, and the question is, what do you and the others in the prison feel? How do you feel, and what do you think about the current Black Lives Matter movement, and what do you all hope to come from it?
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Black Lives Matter. I think we're just like people out there in society. We watched something that was just horrific, and Black Lives Matter became more of an advancement, and people here, white, black, brown, they totally got it, and they're not afraid to use those words in a way that speaks of what time it is today for people of color to, make a stand up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we do.
That's just the way, are you there?
Yeah.
Jarvis, I know it's going to cut off in a minute. Oh, it did. Okay, he'll
cut off.
I hope.
Awesome.
But that question is just, if you read about Jarvis's life, you realize that, it was, he would not be where he is right now if not for the fact that he was a black kid growing up in a society where he was marginalized and he was abused and he was given very, very few resources. His family was very poor. There was mental illness and addiction in his family. They never got treatment. They never got help. And then once he got in the criminal justice system, he had, it was appalling to look at the way that he was treated. One thing after the other, as I said earlier, Jarvis talked about the juvenile justice system in California being the youth on its way to prison system. And he said when he showed up at San Quentin, it was like a reunion in a way, because he met up with so many of the people that, hold on, sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Jarvis?
He met up with so many people who he knew.
The California State Prison, San Quentin, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hey, Jarvis, you back?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I do have another.
Black Lives Matter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I was gonna say else with that was that I think what made a difference for people in prison was the fact that this was the first time. I've been here so long, I've seen riots on television, but this was the first time where it was universally seen from a point of view that you saw all races together. You saw Asians, you saw white, you saw black, you even saw some cops. That was what I think allowed all of us to feel like we were participating in this, because it just had this rainbow effect that it was something different, and it almost was an invitation for all of us, the people around me, to watch, feel like we were connected to that.
Yeah. So the next question is for you, David. And the question is, you interviewed Martin Sheen years ago and told him about your son's troubles. Sheen was no stranger to addiction in his family, and he asked if you believed in God, to which you said no, and to which he replied, you will. Between that chapter in your life and working with Jarvis, how do you feel about God now?
Well, I'm still an atheist, but I believe in God in terms of, the sort of the celebration of life, the goodness, the fact that, that in the midst of a place where we have this epidemic and where we have somebody, these beatings and these killings that we're watching on videos, that there's still hope and that people do rally together. That's what it's all about to me. It's about people. It's about our relationships. It's about, it's about friendship. It's about love.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
What about you, Jarvis?
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Going to put you on the spot. Are you there, Jarvis?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm here.
I was asking you what you thought about that. If you wanted to talk about that, the question they asked was about if I believed in God. Do you?
Oh.
Just an
Oh,
easy,
you
an easy
do me like
question.
that, huh?
Yeah.
You know what? You don't believe in God. What I do believe in is we have to believe in something. If we're gonna make it through this, in our lives, we have to believe in something. I think we need a spiritual base. I think we need to find our own cushions. I think whatever works for us, calling God, call her God. We just find our place in this, and if it's in God's name or in my kid's name, whatever allows us to, do good by man and be out to do what we can for the benefit of all people. And whatever God is to them, God bless them. Well, that's what I think.
Good job.
Yeah. Good answer. Yeah. So the last question of the night is going to be for both of you. Could you both talk about your relationship today and how you both feel towards one another now?
Well, I'll just quickly say, I've said it a bunch, that I love the guy. We've gotten to be really good friends. There's this assumption that, somebody goes in and is sort of, I'm getting Jarvis's story, and it's, what I think that maybe I didn't expect, and what has happened is that I was going to say as much, but I've gotten more from my relationship with Jarvis than he ever could have got from me. And his Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron told me the same thing. And so, he's a remarkable person. And besides connecting, through his website, his books, Finding Freedom, That Bird Has My Wings. Also, Jarvis, I think, loves to connect with people as well. And so if people want to write him, hopefully we can get that address up there too.
Yeah, I went ahead and put the address up towards the top. If you'd like to send Jarvis an email, you can go ahead and find his address up there.
I didn't hear the last part.
That your address is going up there if anybody wants to write.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
The question is now what I think about David, right?
Don't
Yeah.
No. We're gonna be no. What I think about David, like I said in the beginning, meeting him for the first time, you automatically get a sense that, he's coming with some sincerity. He doesn't have to be here, but he finds that, he can give something to society and write about me and write about this place and write about Death Row and write about gangs and write about all these other things that comes out of his book. And to see the way he written that gives me such an appreciation for what he's done for me in my life and the way he has invited me into his own family, and I'm blessed. I'm blessed by having him in my life, and it's just one person that that is a writer and decided to come to know me, and he knows me very, very well. So I really thank you, David.
Well, thank you, Jarvis. There's somebody who posted a note praying for his deserved release. And I think, I sure feel that way. And you asked me earlier, Max, if I believe in God. Well, if God listens to that prayer, I'll believe it forever. And so we're all praying for your deserved release, Jarvis.
Hey, I really appreciate that, too. I really appreciate that from everybody.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. David and Jarvis, thank you both so much. That was just a really incredible, insightful discussion. And I'm sure if all the people in this group didn't know about Jarvis and his fight for his release, they all know now, and they're hoping for your release, Jarvis. So thank you so much.
And you know what? Thank you and your viewers and everybody for just being able to give yourself a moment to just read David's book and read about my life. And I'm just blessed. I'm blessed by so many people, and it makes my days a little bit shorter. Just knowing that people care for me, and I really appreciate that. And God bless you for it.
God bless you too, Jarvis, and thank you so much. Have a good night.
All right, man.
Good night. Thank you.